Right, good morning again. This time we're here for something very special. The APE conference has a scoop, a launch by the STM Association. You know, we're a member organization. I see many members in the room, so I think it doesn't need much extra elaboration. But we're very happy to announce that STM is launching 2020 as a research data year. And it was very good to hear almost every keynote speaker yesterday morning talk about the importance of research data. I've been sort of ticking whenever I heard research data. They were all stressing open science. They were all stressing research data. And the whole idea of STM's Research Data Year is to make sure that publishers take their role in stimulating authors to share their research data. And we also have some very interesting statistics today on what a great impact that has and how that really makes researchers move. So we will hear more about that from the panel, because we have 4 publishers up here who have started doing it or are starting to do this, and they like to share with you how that works, how you can do it, etc., etc. But I also found Jean-Luc Burgerman prepared, who's working on open science and open access for the EU, to say a little bit and to do a short introduction here. Would you like to take the floor?
Yeah.
Sorry, so my neighbor is called Jean-Luc, but you're Jean-Claude.
Yes.
Sorry.
So thanks for inviting me in the Eefke Smit way. So, sorry for this. So no, I think it's a very important topic, and I don't think that the way to frame it is not the importance of research data. The way to frame it is that all science will become data-driven science, if not already. I mean, you can probably plot it on a scale from the top exact sciences going down to the humanities, but even there I would say that we are going for a world where 99% of the science will be based on data sets in one way or another, be it very timidly via text and data mining in the humanities. If you scan the text of big philosophers or whatsoever, or for the enormous data sets that are used in physics or in astronomy. So that's the first thing. So secondly, the second thing is that due to artificial intelligence, which in a certain sense will automate everything that can be automated, because that's to a large extent what these algorithms can do. The increase of data will only, and the importance of it for science will only exponentially increase as well. And thirdly, given the fact that every point in our society, be it physical or non-physical, will become a data point due to the merger of ICTs as a service, but also the merger into the Internet of Things, the Internet of Everything, all these trends will increase each other. So the importance of research data for the future of science cannot be underestimated. It will be the science of the future, will be based on this data, and it will be very important for open science, for the reproducibility, the efficiency and so forth, that we keep a strict eye on it, and in terms of making it available, in terms of making the services available and that's where the publishers can play a big role, for making sense out of it and so forth. So there is a huge movement there, I said it yesterday, going on in the world on trying to streamline this into a common approach, and in particular, Europe should be proud that we are at the forefront there with the Go Fair community. So the FAIR community is findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable data. so this is hundreds of people trying to actually come up with a format comparable to the EP protocol that allows us that all these data will at some point be accessible in a unique way, understandable by machines. But because, I go back to my first 3 trends, given the explosion of data, it's impossible that it is managed and mastered humanly, so it will have to be mastered, and the AI is there to do it by machines. So this digital object, go fair digital object trend and discussions which are going on between US, between ourselves in Europe and many parties, is an essential ingredient to fully exploit the future of open data. So I was looking up and I was thinking, what more arguments do we need to start working on it? Well, there are a few arguments I think that we at least have to repeat all the time for people that are not so core in the business as you are. To start with, if all publicly funded research will become mandatory, openly available, and again, what was said yesterday in the US, what was hinted yesterday, what is happening in China, and what we are doing in Europe, you can assume that that's about 1 trillion of euro on an annual basis of research that will produce data. So this is an enormous sea that will come. Okay, it will come slowly, it's not tomorrow or next year, but we can easily foresee that, let's say in the next 3 to 4 years, this will be standard around the globe. So it's an enormous mass of data points that will have to be handled in one way or another. Impossible to do humanly, so that's where we need services. So it's already there. All the stuff that Figshare and people like that are producing on their annual review of the state of open data just is an illustration of how far and how deep this goes. So that's the first thing. It's already a fact of life. It won't go away. Secondly, it's good for science. The more of this that happens, the more science we can do, the more it is reproducible, the more we can get out of it. So it's good for the funder. If this 1 trillion is being made available in a way that it is fit for reproducibility, fantastic. But it's also good for the scientist, and I think some of your speakers will allude to it. So the study that was in a preprint, well, I read the preprint in archive, I think, where you show that articles that provide a link to the data sets have a potential of being quoted 25% more. So again, not only does an article in open access is read 2 to 3 times more than an article behind the paywall, which is quite logical. If on top of that you provide the data link, you get another 25% more cited. I don't know if you took away your pitch, but anyway, that's what I read. So it's to the benefit for everyone. That's the easy part. The complicated part is to come up with a set of technical tools like this digital object identifier, research digital object identifier, which has to be standard across the globe. Otherwise, we cannot have competing standards. Like you cannot have competing IP protocols or addresses for the internet. So that's the first challenge. And the second challenge is the three challenges. The second challenge is to provide the services to make sense out of this in a way that these services are equitable and accessible and understandable globally. And then thirdly, how to avoid lock-in and how to avoid the problem of which we have been discussing in open access to publications for the last 15 years, that you get new paywalls, you get new ways of barriers that no longer will be the publications, but then the access to the services / the data. So in a nutshell, if you can give an answer to these three, that would be fantastic.
Jean-Claude, you're wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, now you know again why it is so important, research data. I would like to introduce the panel as we have it here. We have for you, how does that work? For you at the left, for me at the right? Yes. Niamh O'Connor, Chief Publishing Officer at PLoS. We have Grace Baynes, Vice President Research Data and New Product Development at Springer Nature. We have Joris van Rossum, STM's Research Data Director. And we have Chris Graf, who you already heard this morning, Director Research Integrity at Wiley. And we're going to show you some statistics, and these publishers are going to share with you what it takes and what it means to do more on research data. And I'd like to start with Grace. How do our authors look at this, and why is research data so important? Shall I think I can click this forward. How does that work? This one. Let's look. The next slide. How can I get the next slide? None of it works. I think that maybe the battery is gone. Yes, I'm doing that. Sorry. Maybe it's not on. Yes, thank you. Great.
Thank you. I think we've just really heard a brilliant explanation about why research data matters. And we heard a lot yesterday about research data and also about open access. And in both cases, open access to articles, open access to research data, they're not end goals in themselves. They are a means to an end, and they are a goal because of what they enable. And what they enable is research to be done better. They support reproducibility and research integrity, and reproducibility is a real issue for the researchers we serve in the journals that we publish, and our books, our monographs. Many researchers cannot reproduce their own data, their own work, and that's often because they haven't managed and stored their own data in a way that makes it accessible to their future self. Opening up research data is also really valuable to making research more effective. It reduces duplication. It makes research studies more productive in terms of research outputs and publications. And there are real citation advantages, which we'll hear about shortly. And impact and visibility, as you'll see in a moment, is one of the main motivators for researchers. So this is something we really need to think about. And in terms of the impacts that research can have and the outputs of research can have on society. So the example I've given here on this slide is actually about what happens when you open up data in terms of driving innovation, driving benefits to the economy, but equally there are benefits to global collaboration to address things like the Sustainable Development Goals. So, publishers have a really important role to play here in two key areas. One is about clear policy, and the second is about better credit mechanisms. And while I've just given you lots of reasons why research data is a good thing, opening up research data is a good thing, we still need to make it worth researchers' time to do, because researchers are time poor and they have many, many competing demands on that time that they have available. So why is it so important for publishers to do this? So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So this is data from the study that Jean-Claude just mentioned, the State of Open Data survey and reports, which we run annually together with Figshare and Digital Science. And there's a number of interesting things that I want to share with you, which are shown on this slide. So one, it's an annual survey, so we have some really interesting longitudinal data, and we can see how things are changing. So this question was about the circumstances that would motivate researchers to share their data. Impact and visibility has been number one forever, and probably will be forever. What is changing is credit. So getting proper credit is becoming more and more important to researchers, and we see that moving up from the number 3 slots in terms of the number of times it was selected from number 4 in 2018. Funder policy matters a lot, and that is becoming more important to researchers, and you can see that changing. But actually, when you ask researchers what motivates them, more researchers say journal policies or publisher requirements than funders. So we as publishers really have a responsibility here. And we also asked researchers what forms of credit they would find valuable. And I don't have the data here, but I can tell you that the number one answer above career advancement was citations. And so then we asked researchers how much our citations a motivator, and if we can move on to the next slide, please. And overwhelmingly, they said that citations would really motivate them to share their data. And that's something that we as publishers really can help with. So there's a lot we can do, and it's, I think, as we're going to hear, there's a lot of help to help you do it as well.
Niamh, I would like to turn to you. Niamh's from PLoS, and you also had some very interesting statistics, right?
Yes, so happily Jean-Claude's done some of my introduction of the importance of this for me, which is fantastic. So picking up on the points that Grace was making about how important it is to have clear publisher policy and what the impact of that is, you can see some data here from a study of papers from BMC and from PLoS about the impacts of introducing the need to have a data availability statement. And if you look at the graphs on the slide, then on the BMC data, which are the blue ones on the left-hand side as you look at it, then you can see that there was, in 2012, BMC started recommending that people should have a data availability statement. So you can see at the very top of the bars, there's a very small amount of light blue where some people, I think about 5% of people, actually started taking up the recommendation. But from the point at which it was made mandatory in 2015, you can really see the impact of that on the data availability statements that were there. And equivalently, on the right-hand side, the data in red, which are from PLoS, where a mandatory requirement for a data availability statement came in 2014, you can really see the impact of kind of what difference that made to people making statements about their data, and they're split a bit by people who deposited in a repository, people who made the data available on request, or people who made the data available in the supplementary information or within their paper. So I think the major thing to take from this really, as you can see, is that it really does make a difference to have a clear policy. And it really does pay back for authors, because this study, which you can see linked here, it's a preprint on Archive from my colleague Ian and some collaborators. You can see up to 25% increase in citations, so there really is a benefit for authors in us facilitating and mandating that they make the data availability statements available.
Thank you. Over to Chris, because Wiley has also started introducing this, right? I think you have a slide for that, yeah?
That's right. A story from Wiley. Who's seen a change curve a bit like that before? Yeah, well, lots of nods. Nobody put their hand up. Well, a few people did. So this is a story from Wiley that change curve sort of illustrates. Let's roll back the clock to 2017, when we had big smiles on our faces. We'd launched our new data sharing policy recommendations. They looked tidy to us. We were kind of thrilled and thought we were sitting pretty. We had 3 policy recommendations and a kind of ladder with increasing expectations for researchers. We thought we were set. Until in about September 2018, we got a letter, an email from a friend who said kind of, "Hey Chris, did you know that your lovely policy ladder, the first step and the second step are pretty much the same. So your lovely policy ladder isn't so much of a ladder." So we had a look at it and realized that he was right. But the story continues. So that was a moment of, I guess you could call it policy crisis or chaos. We emerged from that policy crisis a month or two later, November 2018, with a brand new set of data policy recommendations. A ladder with 4 proper steps on it, with steps that described very discrete and clear things for researchers to do. And the second rung on that policy ladder has a requirement for data availability statements. So a simple disclosure from researchers as to whether or not they've shared their data, and if they have, where they've put it with a link. That's fabulous. So now we really were sitting pretty, and this is a good and robust set of policy recommendations. Through the end of 2018 and 2019, I'll share some more information on this later, but we rolled out those policies. We made it very easy for colleagues, publishers, and colleagues, editors, and colleagues who are working in content management and across the whole sort of value chain to implement those policies. And now, approaching 400 journals require data availability statements at Wiley. And
is that the next slide?
no, it's not. I'm just going
sorry.
to finish. And now, data availability statements are kind of becoming very normal for Wiley journals, and that's where I end. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. No. But just to come back on the chaos thing, can you help publishers here in the room to skip that phase and to sort of immediately jump to that?
Well, that's right, and I think that's what the STM data year is all about, isn't it? So
then we learn.
Skipping the chaos. Everyone's on a change curve, right? There's always going to be some form of chaos or dissatisfaction because change is hard. But if we can accelerate towards the new status quo as rapidly and easily as possible, then we're doing good things.
Okay, before we move to Joris, who's going to tell you much more what STM can offer you in this research data year, I would like to do a very quick survey here in the room among the publishers here. Who of you have started, or in your organization, has your organization started doing something with research data? If so, put up your hand. And who would like to do much more or in a much more structured way? Put up your hands again. Okay, very good. The year is for you. Joris, can you tell us a bit more about it? Shall I move forward?
Yeah, I think indeed, as you said, this last yesterday and today really stressed how important research data is, how it's becoming an essential part of our ecosystem. I also recall the presentation of Professor Deernagel yesterday, who said that publishers are really essential in making this change. Also liked your remark that also it's not just a negative about reproducibility, it's also the promise of AI and harvesting and capitalizing on enormous data that we produce nowadays. So I think all these are essential parts of what we aim to do. It's also collective effort. I think that's also mentioned yesterday. We have to do it as an ecosystem, as an entire a group to bring this change. So the good news is indeed that the hard work has been done. People around me have suffering intensely the last year, so I think we can really offer other publishers the lessons learned and the experience from the publishers. So that's really what this program is about. It's really a concrete implementation plan. There are really concrete steps that publishers can take to increase sharing of research data, linking, and citing, which is so important as one of the motivators for the researchers, of course, who we should not forget. So that's the program really about, really concrete, increasing several metrics in that space. It's a very good scientific practice to measure, so that's also what we want to do in the program. And in the spirit of transparency, we're also going to be very open about the progress. So on our website, which was launched today, stm-researchdata.org, we're also going to place a dashboard where we're going to measure the growth of the number of journals with data policies, articles with data availability statements, and the articles that have links to data sets in them. We talked about some of the successes that that we achieved the last years. I want to add one more, and that is around linking, because Jean-Claude mentioned that it's very challenging. This is, go back one. Yeah, so on the right top you see the Elsevier data on the number of articles that have links to data sets. And as you can see, that increased significantly in the past few years, from 7% to over 20%. Again, showing how effort in this area can really make a significant impact. And on the left top, you see how the articles with links to data sets increased compared to the total published articles. Also, let's not forget, indeed, 25%, we talked about it before, it's something we can really stress to the author. It helps you to be more successful, to link data sets to your articles. And the good news here, actually, it's not challenging. There are challenges, but this is actually not one of them, because there is a clear procedure to do this. If you deposit the metadata to Crossref, and the instructions for that are published on the website, stm-researchdata.org. Basically, it goes automatically, and the links to data sets are incorporated in this colleague's ecosystem. So more information about that on the website.
Wonderful, thank you. Grace, it was so very nice that you were among the very first enthusiastic supporters, maybe even one of the co-initiators of this program. What would be your main message to publishers here in the room to make them join?
So I would say two things. I would say that one of the reasons that we wanted to do this, have this year of research data for STM, and I'm so delighted that STM has initiated this, is that so much of the hard work of figuring out how to do this has already been done, thankfully for us. So groups like Force 11 and the Research Data Alliance have been collaborating across publishers, funders, research institutions and libraries for a number of years to really figure out, like, what does citing data mean, for example, and how to do it. So we don't have to work out that from the ground up, and one of the things that STM is going to do is to help bring together that best practice thinking. We've talked about avoiding the chaos. We're all still learning. We've been implementing research data policies since 2016. We're not finished. When we have finished, we will probably start again because we've learned so much in the interim that we now need to update our policies. So avoid the chaos, learn from others' mistakes and learnings along the way. But I think overwhelmingly the most important reason I would say is if we work together, we can reduce complexity for our authors, for the researchers that publish with us. So when they go to one of Niamh's journals, they don't have a completely different experience to when they come to a Springer Nature journal. That we are together showing them best practice and best practice that will really help them and make it simpler for them. And then also it will enable us to show the benefits and have more studies that show citation advantage, show impacts, and help them achieve the impact and visibility that they really want for their research.
Thank you. Over to Chris, because you said something about the chaos that an early beginner might experience, but how can we help them avoid that? There's a slide, right?
Yeah. There is a slide. There are two slides here.
Okay, good.
That's the first of them. So picking up the story from where we left it, we rolled out the new policies, very specifically the policy that requires data availability statements in 2019. We did that by prioritizing. Right, you can't turn it on at 1,600 journals all at once. We prioritize by discipline, research discipline, and by journal ownership model to make life as easy as we possibly could for ourselves and for others, right? So we wanted to push where the door was going to open very easily. We built a toolkit that has answers to all of the practical questions that people always ask, and some of the philosophical questions as well, sort of to try and make order from the potential chaos. And we had an enormous success. That slide shows the uptick in that slide is turning on of the new policy and the sudden arrival of many, many more data availability statements in articles submitted to Wiley journals. That's what successful policy implementation looks like. If you want to read it and play with live dynamic figures, it's all in the preprint that's on the link on Authoria, the preprint platform. That's what success looks like. So your question was, what advice would you give to others? I'd say start where you can, right? Don't try and do everything at once. Just start where you can make a difference. Create order so that you avoid the chaos. And when you've started where you can, build from there. Yeah. And there's one more slide. I think you're going to ask about our goals. So we want, you said it, Grace. This is a journey, right? That we're on. We're making progress. We made good progress last year. About a quarter of Wiley journals now require data availability statements. This year we want to change that to being about a half of Wiley journals that require data availability statements. So our journey isn't over even this year, right? It's gonna carry on.
Doubling. Well, that's really good. And Niamh at PLoS, how do you measure success?
The main measure of success is the relatively simple one of, is the data availability statement there when it should be? And I think that's the basic measure. But in terms of what it's possible to measure, I think the percentage of those that actually make the data available in a repository, particularly rather than being part of their supplementary information or kind of saying the data are in the paper, seeing that increase will be a measure of success. And the other would be looking at the data actually being used. And at the moment, the best proxy we have for that is the citation increase. But I think it will be interesting to see if there are ways that we can measure that more effectively as this progresses.
And the citation increase, is that what you mean, the plus 25%?
Yes, that's
citations
what I mean.
for articles that have data underneath?
Exactly.
Okay. Before we're going to go back to all the activities that you may expect in the research data year of STM, I wanted to find out, are there any questions in the room, people who would like to ask something, publishers who became curious? Yeah, Kent.
Hi, Kent Anderson with the Geyser in Caldera. Great panel, thanks. A few questions. One is that, I got the speaker right in my ear, it's terrible. One is that privacy laws generally are evolving rapidly. And California just implemented one this month that has been in the works for a few years. It allows households and private people to remove data, to ask people to remove data that they have acquired. Do you anticipate, so first question is, do you anticipate these data availability statements being revised at some point if those types of situations arise, and what kind of are you prepared for that?
I can start to address it. So how do we, the question is, what happens when a data availability statement is no longer correct?
Yeah.
Hey, we have a correction mechanism, right? We use it all the time to correct minor problems and to correct major problems as well. And I can only imagine that we would use exactly that same mechanism to address data availability statements that are no longer current.
Great. Second question, funding of databases has been an issue that has now reached a point, because some of the databases are getting long in the tooth, and they've run out of the original grant funding, and so the people who are running them now, are getting them funded through subscription models. Is that in any way a problem for the open science movement? Then I have one last question.
I don't think I caught the question.
So if a database is funded via a subscription model, so the only people can get access to it are subscribers to that database, is that a problem for the open science movement?
I think if we're talking about data repositories, my personal view is that the data should be as open as possible. There are obviously situations, for example, in sensitive human data or other sensitive data where it's as open as necessary, but there are cases where that access needs to be controlled. But what we are aiming for is to open up research data so that it's as publicly accessible as open access articles. However, there does need to be a sustainable model for supporting the deposition of that data and the hosting of it. So I think that's one of our next challenges as a community, to understand what is a sustainable model for making sure that those repositories can continue.
Yeah. Maybe I can add one aspect to your first question. I think indeed, ideally, everything is open and should be open. However, there are already cases where that's not possible, for example, with medical data. So if you look at the framework that we also publish on the website, there are 6 different models, and some of them really take into account that some data cannot be shared or only upon request. So that's already incorporated in the models that were developed in the last couple of years. Yeah. And indeed, as you say, they probably need to be adapted in the future.
Yeah. I can add to that there are many sharing rules, but the whole principle is that people at least start sharing, under certain rules. So for certain medical data, you can only share within
No,
research
understood.
groups.
But I
and-
think,
yeah.
I think to Grace's point, I think what I was trying to get to is it seems that there's a push to put all this data out there, but it's expensive to host it, it's expensive to
Yeah,
keep it up,
true.
and there doesn't seem to be a mechanism right now to fund that at scale. So third question, and then I'll give it up. So this claim, the claim
can
that there's
come
an
here.
up to a 25% increase in citations for papers that publish data sets, is that published anywhere in a
Yeah.
peer-reviewed form?
I
Could you
think
give
we
me the
even have a
citation?
link to it.
It's a preprint currently, so
So it's not published anywhere in a...
Yeah, it's published as a
I-
No,
preprint.
in a peer-reviewed form.
I am aware, Kent, by your definition, then the answer is it's a preprint, or it's preliminary research, if you
not
would
just
prefer
my
that
definition, my friend.
as a way of defining it.
Okay, thanks.
The,
But it
the
is
new
publicly
STM website has a link to it, so you'll find it there. I
But
think Chris,
I
yeah,
just
sorry.
wanted to just add,
Please.
so I believe that article is now under submission at a journal, and so will be, we hope, published in due course. But there are other studies which have been published and particularly around specific subject areas, looking at citation advantage. And depending on the subject area and depending on the study, it ranges from between 9% in some fields to up to 50% in astrophysics, for example. So there is other already published research which shows a citation advantage.
And is it all about citations? So another preprint, damn, I don't know if it's been published, but the author of the preprint is a gentleman called Tim Vines. Maybe people in the room know Tim. And it's a small study in ecology journals looking at whether there is an association between a data availability statement in an article and an increased usage of a data set. And you're not going to believe this figure, I'm not sure I do, but in the preprint, Tim Vines and colleagues suggest that the inclusion of data availability statement in an article is associated with an 1,000-fold increase in usage of a data set. Right? I don't, maybe that number's way out, but even if it was a 10-fold or a doubling of usage, that would be okay by me.
I see 2 hands in the room, 3 now. Please, the lady over there, the researcher.
Eva Furman from Finnish Environment Institute. I would like to ask a new area which is using videos as data.
Oh, yeah.
Like behavioral action research, there's quite a lot of this where actually the data is videos where you do different kind of experimentation. Is there something happening on this? I know that some journals are already using that, and how is that linked with the discussion you have had now? Thank you.
I'll start, and I'm sure others have intelligent things to say on this. You're absolutely right, and when we talk about data, we don't just mean spreadsheets, tabular data. I'm talking about data in its broadest sense, so I absolutely mean videos, I mean images. Software, that's all data, and there are platforms like Figshare where one of their real benefits is that they can host multiple file types and you can preview video in browser. I think how we handle those as publishers, as part of the article, is a very good question, and I don't think it's one that certainly we haven't nailed yet, but it is one that we're absolutely thinking about.
Then I saw the hand of Toby. That's good, because Toby was an early data pioneer when he was still at OECD. Toby?
Yeah, yes, I was going to a comment on the Tim Vine numbers. One of the things that we did at the OECD was that under all the charts and graphs in the OECD publications, we put a DOI link to the data of that chart or graph. And I'm amazed no other publishers do this, because it's, of all the things, the cool things that we did, this had the biggest impact.
For discoverability, right?
For use of that data.
Yeah.
So those links were clicked. We were delivering like 2 million downloads a year of those Excel files that sit behind the graphs and charts. So if you want to get your data used, that is the single biggest thing you can do, is simply put a DOI to the data behind the chart or graph. But there's another challenge. All the OECD data sets have been citable in a normal way since the mid-2000s, except that I couldn't even persuade the OECD authors to include a citation to their own data sets in the bibliographies of the stuff that they wrote. And there is a real major cultural problem here, because when I challenged them and said, well, for goodness sake, you cite this paper, you cite this other report, but you don't cite your own data, why not? They go, but it's data, you don't cite it. And I think that there's one big thing that publishers need to do is to change that behavior so that the data itself is cited in the references at the end of an article. And that is a major challenge because it's not in the culture. So if it's a task for you guys this year, in all the systems, I agree, the systems are there now, but the next huge change is to change the culture so that authors actually cite. So the citation advantage shouldn't be to the paper, but to the actual data set.
I see so many hands now. Please, quickly.
I don't mind not, you want to... So I struggle with that. I struggle with asking researchers to cite the data that they're reporting alongside their study and with their study in a paper. I think that's a behavioural change that feels weird because you cite other people's stuff. I really have every intention to encourage researchers to cite the other data that maybe they're referring to. But when they're creating new data and sharing it for the first time, perhaps before or alongside publishing the article, I just think that's one behavioural change too many. I think maybe we start by asking people to share the data in a fair way, not necessarily an open way.
Magdalena, I saw your hand going up, and I have a feeling that it may be related to this.
Yes,
Roger,
thank you.
I still know, but...
You read me very well, thank you very much. So a quick response to the statement about citing data with the figures. That's actually something that Nature has done for quite some time, the data behind figures. We don't do it on all Springer Nature journals, but a number of journals in the family. And I would actually support the call for citing data with a DOI, especially if the data set has been published. It doesn't matter if it's the authors themselves who generated previously or in the current setting, it increases transparency. And also we have to remember that data sets these days become so complex and so rich that researchers return to them over and over again. So individual publication does not have to necessarily report new data. They can mine it can mine it in a new way. So I would just come out in support of that. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. And by the way, in the starter's kit that Joris will be explaining later, the linking and the citation and having a DOI is one of the very fundamental steps. So thank you for raising that, Toby. Yeah, Jean-Claude?
I think this brings us back also, the solution at least, brings us back to what we discussed yesterday. It should be part of the incentives. Because I have sympathy for, it's difficult for a publisher to make it mandatory to ask for these citations, but a funder can ask for it, and a university can reward it. If the intensity of citation of my data set is part of my curriculum development for tenure track, I will do it. It's as simple as anything else. So that is, I think, one part I wanted to say. And then on the cost issue, we have heard that many times, but we never talk about what we lose by not doing it. And you gave the study which we did with Technopolis, the consultant. So the lack of non-reproducibility of data is esteemed to cost us in Europe between 10 to 12 billion.
Wow.
And the opportunity costs 17 billion per year.
Oh, well.
On a yearly basis, Europe invests, the 28 still, member states invest between 15 billion per year in data hosting, traffic, processing, and so forth. It's just a matter of priorities.
Yeah.
Here too, the money is there. It's a matter of making it, redirecting it.
Excellent. Last question to Roger. Roger Schoenfeld here up front.
Thank you. Very interesting panel. Thank you all for sharing, and to Jean-Claude and everyone for sharing all the scientific value that can come from data sharing. I certainly strongly agree with that. I think it's great to see publishers taking such a strong interest in this area. I guess what I'd like to hear a little more clearly than I think I have heard yet is why is it in publishers' strategic interests to make this kind of investment? What's the benefit to the business? Can someone give just a clear, simple explanation of that for us, please?
Niamh.
I can start with that at least. Well, I mean, for PLoS, it's completely aligned with our mission. So, I mean, our mission as a publisher is to enable research sharing and to, move us to a point where scientific information becomes available more quickly and more openly, so that people are able to build on that and increase, scientific and, I guess, research discovery in all fields. So for us, we see that as completely aligned with the reason that we're here. So the investment and the resource that it takes to make sure this is done is something that's really fundamental to what we do. And it would seem a little strange to me, I think, if we were not prepared to commit to doing that, alongside sharing the write-up of the research as an article. I don't know if other people...
I can add. For me, speaking personally, it comes back to our purpose, why we're here. And our purpose, I think, you can describe it in all sorts of ways, but it's to power research communication. Okay, and Jean-Claude, you said this a few minutes ago, and at the United Nations, if pretty much all science will be data science, then powering research communications means preparing researchers for the advantages of sharing their data and for the requirements that are going to be put upon them by their funders. So, it comes back to our purpose.
I absolutely agree with that, but I also think that if you're thinking about what's the business justification, which is a very good question, it is very much about what are we here as publishers to do, but there are also potentially real benefits to journals and to publishers. So we've talked about the citation advantage. That's not just an advantage for the author of the research article, it's also an advantage for the journal in which it appears. If you are driving usage of your content, then that is in your interest as a publisher. So more traffic to your website, more engagement with your content, and potentially more citations are some of the reasons why publishers might consider this, in addition to it being the absolute right thing to do to advance research.
Okay, now that the very, very last question, please.
I actually wanted to add to what you said, Grace, is that if you don't do it too, as a publisher, you risk missing an important step in the evolutionary cycle of what a publisher is and what a publisher does. So I think that while there are great reasons up here, and some of them may be monetizable at the moment or not, that in the long term, it would be foolish to miss this rung in the ladder.
Thank you, Anne. That is the perfect bridge to the final slide of yours, because you've now all heard how it's not even a question to do this or not to do it. It is unavoidable. And Joris will tell us how easy you're going to make it for everybody, right?
Yeah, so what are we going to do in this research data year? First of all, again, a lot of resources, a lot of information, a lot of best practices, tools, how to get started. So that's all published on the website, so please visit that. Of course, going to be added with more information. The dashboard, I mentioned that, very important. Also showing progress in terms of these concrete metrics, which will be published soon. Very important in this effort are workshops. Again, the whole essence as a collective effort is to learn from each other. We had a first very successful workshop in December in London. We had over 40 people, about 15 organizations representing there, not just publishers, but also organizations like Crossref. We're going to have more. So we have another workshop in London on the 26th. In April, we're going to launch our US activities. Focused on US publishers, but also on societies for whom it might be even more challenging to bring about this change. And having seen yesterday's presentation, maybe we should also have a workshop in China. We can discuss that later. Yeah. But more workshops planned later this year. We're going to have webinars where some of us will present. lessons learned and how to get started, and even things like on-site visits. So if you are in need of specific support, we can come by and help you with specific aspects of rolling this out to your community. Last but not least, please join the program. We have already 10 publishers join this program. So with those publishers we work intensely together. We have the workshops where we go in depth in some of the aspects, and also with these publishers we work on collecting the data and publishing on the website. So again, over 10 publishers, you see them on the screen, and if you're interested to join, please come to me or send me an email, and there are also brochures, by the way, on the table outside for more information. So yeah, please join, because again, it's easier than you think, and it's I think also extremely important to indeed participate in this evolutionary step in the role of publishers in a changing ecosystem.
Yeah. And if we can scale up the statistics that we saw, it would mean a tripling in the quantity of shared data in only a few years. So let's make that contribution to open science as publishers collectively. Okay, that was the round of the panel. I would like to ask one last word of advice from everybody in a short sentence. Chris, I see you with the microphone.
Okay. I've already said this, but start where you can, right, and build from there, and very deliberately try to make things as simple as you can, absolutely always.
Grace?
Don't reinvent the wheel, and keep your purpose in mind.
Niamh?
Yeah, I was also going to say a clear policy and mandate data availability statements, because it really does make a difference.
Okay, Joris?
Yeah, I would again stress join the program, because I understand not all publishers have the resources to start things up like some of the publishers here have. So joining the program will save you time, will not cost you time.
That's a good thing. Give them a big applause, please. Thank you. Thank you.